Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Global Renaissance Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Trevor Barron, aka Trev Woods. And today's just me. You guys can see if you're watching this on YouTube. It's just me today because I have a lot of things I want to talk about. I haven't recorded an episode in a little while. And there's been a lot of stuff going on in my own personal life as well as the world that I want to talk about. So today's episode is going to be called My Honest Attempt at Authentic Expression. And I'm calling it this because that's a phrase that sat kind of on my mind. It's written down in different places in my room because that's what I want. That's the place I want to get to, right? I feel like I am so serious and invested in communication, but I often struggle with expressing my most authentic thoughts. And so that's something I want to start doing publicly. And so this episode is going to be, my venture into that. So come along with me, guys. I'm going to try to express myself as best I can. So what I want to start with is a little like kind of personal recap of what I've been doing. I just got back from Jamaica. You guys can see the flag behind me. I'm in my room right now. Got the home setup going. But I just got back from a trip to Jamaica, and a little background on me, my relation to the country. My dad was born in Jamaica. He moved to the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Croix, when he was 9, and then moved up here for college. But that's always been part of my identity. Like I always say, like I'm Jamaican. I'm very American. But the association between America and blackness doesn't really exist. Like when you say American, there's a certain kind of thought that sits in your head, and so to associate myself with kind of a black nation, I've always really heavily identified with that Jamaican part of me. So again, you see the flag behind me. I got another flag right here. Shout out to the fatherland. That's what you call it, right? But anyway, so I went down to Jamaica. This was not like a vacation by any stretch of the imagination. I went down to Kingston. That's where my father was born. The house he was born in is still in the family. And so my aunt, I'm super close with my aunt. Just a little explanation kind of on my family dynamic. So my dad has 5 siblings, and they all live in the Northeast except for his oldest brother. So it's my Uncle Fred is the oldest. He still lives in St. Croix. Then my dad's the second oldest. He's a year younger than my uncle. Then my Aunt Denise is a year younger than my dad. And she has lived in Massachusetts my entire life. So she went to school in Pennsylvania. She went to Lehigh, where my oldest uncle went to. But she's basically been following my dad around ever since. So there's her. She lives in Massachusetts. She's always lived in Massachusetts. Then I believe the next person in line is my Aunt Maureen. She lives up in Rochester. Then my Uncle Maurice, he lives in Boston. He's the only other one with kids. So my cousin's the one who does my hair. Shout out to Bethany. Jordan and Naomi, shout out. Those are like, y'all know, it's all love. But those are his kids. And he lives in Boston. And then the youngest, my Aunt Darcy, she also lives up in Rochester, where my Aunt Maureen does. So everyone's pretty close. But my Aunt Denise, like I said, she's basically been following around my dad since they were like 20 something, whatever. And she was always around. She doesn't have any kids. She's not married, but she was always around. If I like, how they say it takes a village. Like she was a very integral part in my village growing up, and my entire life. We're pretty close. I personally believe, as far as my position in the family, I'm of the things that I value, family is at the top of the list. I feel very much indebted to my family, especially my parents. I'm not the person I am today without them. Obviously, I'm not even here without them, but there are so many advantages that I've had because of who my parents are and what they've done in their lives. And so I have a great level of gratitude for them, but the rest of my family as well, because they were a part of the village. They were a part of the community I had growing up, and that community was very strong. I always had a strong support system, and that was my whole family. But my aunt, she was like the main person. If I wasn't with my parents, like if someone needed to watch us or take us somewhere, like my Aunt Denise was the one to do that. I remember when my sister and I were kids, we we used to get on her so much because we'd be like, "Oh, you're not exercising. Oh, you be eating too many sweets." Like, we used to get on her because my parents are super like like on top of that type of stuff. Like we was always eating our vegetables, drinking water, stuff like that. I wasn't allowed to drink soda for the first couple years of my life. I wasn't allowed to chew gum. Y'all remember the what are they called? The blow pops, where it's like a lollipop and then there's gum on the inside. We used to get those at church, and my mom would make sure we were allowed to eat the lollipop part, but you couldn't chew the gum. Like that's how deep it got, because they didn't want us developing a habit of chewing sugary things all the time. But my aunt was always the one. We would go to her house, and she would lace us with the candy and the ice cream. And we could eat whatever, we could eat the fast food, like all that. So my aunt was the cool aunt. So we've always had a really close relationship. She's super invested in all of us, me, my sister, my brother, my three cousins. Like she's always been super invested in our lives and helping us grow and helping put us in the best position possible. So for me, when I think about that, I as I grow, as I get older, as I become an adult, like I want to be able to give that same energy back. And so, about 10 years ago, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She beat it, but then last year. No, it might have been 2 years at this point. But she was celebrating the 10th anniversary of her being cancer free, and then she found out she had, I believe it was colon cancer. It was just something else. She got another diagnosis, and when that happened, I was living really close to where she was. I was like in an apartment that was like 10 minutes down the street from her. And so I would see her all the time. And I just tried to be as much of a support as I could. And like I said, those are things that really matter to me. And since then, I make sure I go over to her house. I live probably 45, 50 minutes away from her, but I make sure I'm over there on a semi-regular basis just to say what's up, see if she needs anything. Because again, I think, I've said this, one of the last clips I posted on the podcast page, I said, we have a responsibility to our fellow man, but especially as your relation to those people gets closer, I think your responsibility increases. So my aunt is like the closest person to me outside of my immediate family, and so I feel a very strong sense of responsibility to her. And her and her siblings, like my dad and my uncles and aunts, they have their own problems in terms of their relationships. Like I said, they're all grown. And so I let them deal with that. I'm very much impartial to their problems. Like I'll listen to anybody, but I feel like for me, being the only biological boy on my dad's side, like again, there were six of them. So my grandparents had six kids, and only two of those ended up having kids. So there were six kids and five biological grandchildren. So my sister, my cousin Bethany, me, my cousin Jordan, my cousin Naomi. Now we adopted my brother, so there's six of us. But like biologically, I'm the only boy. And growing up in church, especially, you hear these Bible stories about the oldest son, the eldest son, the eldest son. Like that line of succession goes through the eldest son in the family. And obviously, we live in a new day and age where it's all not all about the patriarchy, and it's a good thing. But I still do kind of take that role, and I view the responsibility the same. I think that whether it's right or wrong, I think the man tends to be the leader of the family. I look at my dad as the leader of our family, like our nuclear family, but I also look at him as like the leader of his extended family, like in terms of his brothers and sisters. Like in my observations, he's the one that when everybody's talking, the one voice stands out more than others. It's his. And so because I look at like my dad as the guy of his generation, like I'm his son. So, there's a role to fill there. So for me, making sure I have good relationships with my whole family is important to me. So again, they all have their own levels of conflict due to, inheritances, properties, all that type of stuff, family drama. That's real. I try to stay out of it. I'll be informed. You can talk to me about it, but at the end of the day, y'all got to handle y'all business. That's not my business as of yet. I personally think they should be consulting me in all the decisions that they make, just because I think I have a good head on my shoulders, but that's, again, it's not my business yet. But the point of that is that my aunt's very invested in her lineage, and she's kind of like the family historian. She's very sentimental about that stuff. And so when her parents died, my grandfather died, I think I was in like fourth grade, and then my grandmother died the summer between my fifth and sixth grade year. So that's like 13, 14 years ago. And since then they got left with some houses, one in St. Croix, one in Jamaica. And they, like I said, my dad and my aunts and uncles, they have their conversations about that, and it creates all these different levels of conflict and just different things because they have different perspectives on what they want to do. But one thing I know about my aunt is she has a very sentimental bond to Jamaica, and she has tried to instill like a level of connection between my generation, like me, my sister, my cousins, um, to Jamaica because that's her culture. And when even when she left the island to go to St. Croix, like she would go back frequently. So she tells me all the time about different stories from her childhood, different stories about different family. I went over to New York in January for my birthday to see my friends, but I have an aunt who lives out there. She's got to be in her 90s. Her name's Miss Brooks. So I went out to Brooklyn to go visit her just to say hi and just chop it up. Like I said, I think it's very important to stay connected. I think that especially in the society we live in the US, there's not a clear emphasis on maintaining family ties, especially extended family ties. But I think that stuff's really important. All of these people, at least to me, have an interest in who I am and who I'm becoming, and so I want to make sure I pay that back. Again, all of these different people, Miss Brooks, for example, like we went to New York when I was a kid a couple times. We stayed at her house, right? So these are people who have had a hand in my development one way or another, and so I want to make sure I'm maintaining those relationships as best as I can. So like I said, my aunt's super big on kind of keeping that connection with Jamaica. So she told me that I'm going down, and I want you to come. My cousin was also going down. She was doing some work out there, and so she said, I want you to come down. I want you to see. I want you to meet people. I want you to see the house. I want you to look after your cousin. So I did. I was down there for about 10 days. I was there from the 17th. I got back the 28th, so it was that 2 days ago as I'm recording this, and it was an interesting experience. So I hadn't been to Jamaica since I was in third grade, so 8 years old. It was, I think, February. It was either February or April break in third grade, and we went down for about a week. But I haven't been since I was a literal child. I'm now 24 years old, right? That's 16 years. Uh, so it was important for me to go back there because, again, I do feel like I have a connection to this place, but it's not as strong as I might want it to be. I mean, I have friends who call me a fake Jamaican. Quite honestly, it's a fair criticism because I went down there. I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely an American. The house, the house we were staying in was like the house my dad was like grew up in. No AC. It was hot. Like it was, it was real hot, and I didn't even think to ask. Like I walked in, I'm like, "Yo, it's hot. Where's the AC?" And my aunt just laughed at me. She was like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "Y'all don't got no AC in here." She was like, "No." I just looked at her. I was like, are you serious right now? She was like, are you serious? So I had to adjust. I eventually got used to it. But man, when I tell you, I was hot. Like I was real hot. And I could just tell. People would look at me and I could tell they just look at this. He not from here. And we were out one place, just going to get some food, and this kid walked up to me. I think he was trying to raise money for his little soccer team. And he said something to me. I said something back. We both didn't understand each other. So there were a lot of interactions like that. But over the course of the 10 days that I was there, I talked to family members. I talked to one of my, I guess, great aunts. Honestly, once you get outside of that, like this is my dad's siblings, kid, like everybody's a cousin or something, right? So this was somebody who is related to me, but she's like 94, right? She lived in St. Thomas, which is 30 miles from Kingston. It's 30 miles, but it took 3 hours to get there because the road was so bad. I mean, it wasn't even a road in half the places. Like it went from paved to straight dirt and rock. So it took 3 hours to get there. But we went to her house. We sat there. I wish I would have like set up my podcast stuff. We should have recorded because it was really interesting just to hear her perspective as someone who grew up in Jamaica, been on the earth 94 years. She's still moving too. Like she came in bopping around. She's talking about I'm 94. I was like, oh word, like good for you. But again, she has just a different perspective on life. She's been through different things than I have. She's lived on the island her whole life. So she was just explaining stuff about our family, just these different lines of lineage. And I don't know if that's redundant, but you get what I'm saying, right? These different kind of lines of the family tree. And we're just learning stuff. Somebody in our family changed their last name just because they felt like it. And so they're like two sets of last names that these people might be related to us. So again, it was just really cool for me to kind of get this experience that I hadn't had. Again, I met some of, you meet different family members. Honestly, I feel like the biggest family reunions when someone dies, right? So I'm like, grandfather and my grandmother's funerals. Met so many people. Oh, this is your cousin. I don't know you. Oh, this is your cousin. I don't know you. And I wasn't at 8, 9, 10, 11. I wasn't particularly interested in getting to know these people, right? I didn't care about any of that. But now as an adult, you meet these different people, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Like, we're related. We have this kind of blood tie, but I want to know about you as an individual. And you start hearing them explain themselves and hearing where they come from, what they're interested in, and you realize, like, certain things are hereditary, right? Like, you hear different stories about people. Like, I think my grandfather was like a politician. Like, he just loved to talk. You get what I'm saying? Like, you learn things like that, and I found that really cool. So I enjoyed that aspect of it. Another thing that I enjoyed about my trip was that it was kind of just a break from normalcy. It interrupted the kind of way I was living, because you do what you need to do, but I just spent 10 days in a different country, right? So I'm removed from all the things I normally do. I haven't played basketball in 2 weeks. My jump shot's probably trash, but none of y'all can guard me anyway. And if you want to come find out, let me know. But I haven't played basketball in weeks. I haven't played the drums in weeks, right? I haven't been able to do the things that I normally do to a certain extent. And so I was kind of left in a place where, like I said, it was hot. And I spent a lot of the time in like a coffee shop, just sitting there listening to music, thinking, writing, and it gave me the opportunity to really lock in with myself. I spend a lot of time reflecting on me, my experiences, my values. I've always been that way. I consider myself to be a very self-aware person. I think that's very important to be. I work really hard on being the best version of myself, and so because of that, I always have to evaluate like where I'm at in terms of personal development. But especially when you have time to yourself, right? Like, when you're in the midst of like a work week, or you just have a lot going on, it's hard to really take the time to sit and think about yourself. But like I said, I'm on this island. I don't got no friends here, right? Like, so I got time to really sit with myself. As a matter of fact, I don't have an option but to sit with myself and think about where I'm at and where I'm going and where I've been. So that was another benefit for me. And there were quite a number of things that came into my head, that I want to speak on, and I want to evaluate. And again, I want to express in kind of a public level, because for me, the reason I even have the podcast, and I've said it multiple times, like, I think that my biggest strength is communication, especially verbal communication. I'm able to write really well. I'm able to express myself through conversation really well. I also think that my ability to intake information, synthesize it, and then package it in a way that's digestible and comprehensible for somebody else, is very much unique. So with that, I feel like that's what I excel in, and I want to be able to use that ability to help others. But at the same time, I found so many times that there are so many things that I find difficult to express. There are so many times where I'm sitting in there with 1,000 thoughts running through my brain, and I'm like, I can't get a handle on one to be able to express it. Or there are things that sit so deep inside me that I can't get them out in a way that's comfortable, right? There are things that I know very intimately about myself that I don't feel comfortable sharing all the time. And those are the things I feel like that need to be said, because I think most of us have that hesitation with a lot of things, where it's like, we all feel comfortable. We all have a public facing persona. when you meet people, this is how you come off. If you have a certain level of relationship with them, they might see this layer of you. If you have a deeper relationship, they might see this layer of you, right? But we all have those things that we keep very close to us, about our own selves. And I feel like for me, with what it is that I'm trying to do, it would be a disservice to my own mission to be holding all of these intimate thoughts, feelings, and ideas to myself for the sake of comfort. Growth and comfort can't coincide, and I want to choose growth as much as possible. So, with that being said, I want to get into some thoughts and ideas and just things that have been sitting on my mind and on my heart just about my own personal experience in the world, because this is my honest attempt at authentic expression. And one of those things is super topical right now. I wanted to have a conversation like just on mental health. This is one of the things I was thinking about when I was in Jamaica, and I was like, okay, when I get back, I want to do an episode and I want to talk about mental health. And it just so happened that my kind of journey started, well, how should I put this? When I was in high school, I got diagnosed with like anxiety and depression. There was a precipitating event, and I'll get into the story, but that's kind of been something that has been with me since. And recently, like I said, I'm recording this on Friday, June 30th. So I think yesterday there was a Supreme Court decision where it was that case with Harvard where they struck down affirmative action, right? And the reason that's so, I guess, relevant to the mental health conversation for me is because when I was in high school, I think the thing that led to me just kind of becoming apathetic to the world was feeling like, as a black man in a white world, nobody cares. The last episode that I recorded, we were talking about hope. And I wanted to have that conversation because so often I feel like, man, we live in a world where nobody cares, especially the people in power, the man, right? They don't care about you. No matter what they say, the democracy is for the people and by the people. That's not true, and we know it. And the more you pay attention, especially to the political landscape, the more you realize that. I think it's very hard to be politically aware and not understand that those in power don't actually care about the people they're supposed to be representing. And I think the Supreme Court case on affirmative action is just an example of that. So I want to speak on two things. I want to speak on that kind of situation first, and then I want to speak on kind of how that relates to my own journey with mental health. So as far as this court case goes, as far as this ruling on affirmative action, I think it's interesting. I fall kind of on the left side of the political spectrum. I think that's pretty clear. And I think, one, I didn't read, the justices' opinions or anything like that. I really my relationship with politics is at an arm's length. I have a political science degree. I'm going to show y'all because I have it right here. This is my diploma. You see it. I don't know, what the lighting's like, but that's my diploma. It says Peter Trevor Barrett with the degree of Bachelor of Arts with a concentration in government, and government's just poli-sci, right? So as somebody who chose to study political science, I don't like to be super politically engaged. I like to know what's going on. I don't ever want to be not informed completely, but also I feel like it's very difficult to stay informed and up to date and not just get kind of overwhelmed. And that's something that I found. Again, I'm going to kind of detail my history with this stuff, but as far as this ruling goes, I think the two sides on affirmative action are, it's unfair that certain races or groups of people get a leg up when it comes to admissions for higher education or jobs or things like that. And then the other side is well, the reality is that without taking these measures, you got to kind of overcorrect, right? So we've built a society where certain people have certain advantages. And so if you kind of act as if we're colorblind or whatever, then you maintain the status quo, which is already unequal. And so if I'm, here and you're here, well, we got to give you more. I can't, if you give us the same, like again, if we're standing, right, and I stand here, my position's here and your position's here, if you give us the same ladder, I'm still going to be this much ahead of you, right? You got to give this person more to make it even. That wasn't the most eloquent way to describe it, but I think it gets the point across. And that's my feeling with affirmative action. Not to mention that it statistically, I think, benefits white women the most, but the point is, we live in a society where we barred black people from reading or writing for 200 plus years, right? We didn't give them the resources to get proper education. We didn't give them the resources to build wealth. And so now in year 400 and something of this country or whatever, right? Like there's this huge gap as it pertains to wealth, resources, education. And so you have to actively counteract that in order to close the gap. You can't just act like, okay, we all know that racism is bad, so we're all equal now, and then treat everybody equally and expect equity to result from that. That's not how things work. You have to compensate for the years of rampant inequality. I mean, the inequality still exists. The policies are still in place. But just on a surface level, right? We're not in 1850 anymore. Clearly, we've made progress in that regard. So, but we can't sit on that, right? So we want to continue to strive for equality. But in order to do that, again, you can't just say, all right, we're equal now, we're going to treat everybody equally. That discounts the fact that some people were held behind for 200 plus years. So that's my feeling on affirmative action. I think it's important that we take into account the societal barriers that people face in when it comes to achieving on an educational level. I think it's important that we work to counteract those things. I think education for me has always been something that's stressed in my life. Again, I got my bachelor's degree. I don't really plan on going back to school because I hate academia. But, education is something that without the formal education that I've had, I wouldn't be in the position that I am today. I think we all kind of have an understanding that education is an equalizer to a certain degree. It'll at least set you up to live a better life. And there are so many people for whom they just simply don't have the opportunity to receive a great education just because of things that are outside of their control. I mean, if you look at just Massachusetts, I'm going to use for an example. Massachusetts, the Boston area, is the Boston metropolitan area. The last time I checked was the 7th most segregated metropolitan area in the country, right? So if public schools are being funded by property taxes, all the black people live in a certain area, all those areas are impoverished, well, what does that mean? The schools that black people attend aren't funded. They don't have access to the tutoring, they don't have access to the instruction, right? So their ability to receive a high level education is stunted by the racial dynamics of the country. And so to ignore that when you get to college admissions time is ignoring a reality. So I don't remember who said it. I don't remember if it was Michelle Obama or Justice Brown in her dissent, but it was like ignoring race legislatively does not make race no longer real in practicality. It was something to that effect. Again, like I said, I don't have it in front of me, but I think that's the important thing. We live in a racialized society. It's been that way since we got here, and by we I mean Americans, quote unquote. Since the first settlers got here, this has been a racialized society. And so to now act as if, hold on, taking race into account, like positively, consciously taking it into account so that we can try to close this gap, is suddenly that's a problem. I think that's something that I found in my personal life has always bothered me. Like there's a group of people who have been running this whole time with an advantage, and as soon as you try to take away their advantage, they're claiming oppression. All right, that's kind of my issue with this, and I think most people share that same sentiment. So it's unfortunate, but one of the things for me is like, well, what can we do about it? It doesn't feel like much, and that feeling of helplessness is one that's kind of followed me for a very, very long time. When I was in high school, so like I said, my experience in high school, I had a lot of conversations around racial dynamics and affirmative action because the school that I went to, my high school, Boston College High School, 7th through 12th, that's when I went, and it is a predominantly white institution. It's when I was there, I ended up giving a speech and I did the numbers. It was 80% white. I think it was like 4% black. I don't remember the other numbers, but it was 80% white. And a lot of these students were coming from places where the town population was 98+% white. So these are not people who have interacted with anybody other than who looks like them. And that affected my and my peers' experiences. When you walked in, like you could tell, you could tell you look different. It's very clear. And then the energy you get from people. I mean, the amount of kids when I was in 7th grade who walked up to me and said, "You're the first black person I've ever talked to." I was like, what? That's crazy to me. Because even though I was in black spaces a lot, like church was black when I was around, family was black, the barbershop was black, right? I was in these black spaces. I went to school with white people, right? When I'd be around town, I'd see white people. So being a black person, interacted with white people all the time. So to hear these people say they never met a black person, I was like, that's crazy to me. But that colored my experience at school. I mean, I'm going to do an episode talking about like my high school experiences with some of my friends from high school because I couldn't possibly explain all of this like from my perspectives. We all had different perspectives on it. But I mean, we had race wars when I was in 8th grade. Kids were getting called an N-word. Like kids would say stuff to you just to try you because they knew. I remember when we were learning about like the first kids who integrated schools like back in the 60s after Brown v. Board. Like they would go to these schools and all the white kids would be saying the craziest things to them, slurs, calling them out their name, resorting to physical violence. And the kids just had to take it because they knew if they retaliated, they would be kicked out. Now, obviously, it wasn't to that degree, but that dynamic still existed. These kids, at 12, 13, they understood that they can say stuff to us and it's in our best interest to just let it slide. And so they did that. All right, it was an all-boys school. You 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old boys are already not great. You add that racial dynamic to it, and it colored my experience. I didn't have a great time when I was in high school. I mean, it was all-boys school, so it was already pretty bad. But, for that reason, my high school experience was not good. Like, when I look back at it, I don't be like, oh, good times. I mean, I think a lot of people didn't like high school, but I really was like, that was painful. I suffered. And a lot of it was because of these racial dynamics. Now, that was happening from the moment I stepped onto campus in 7th grade. My sophomore year, I think, is when things took a significant downturn for me as far as my perception of the world and how it affected my mental health. So my sophomore year, I believe, was 2014, 2015. And in August, that's when Mike Brown was killed out in Ferguson and those riots were happening. And so that's one end of my school year. So this is how the school year is starting off. And naturally, we're talking about it. We're 14, 15 years old. We got Twitter. We have opinions on the world. And so we're talking about it. And I remember one time I was sitting in the library and I hear the proctor and one of they were both teachers. One of them was, I think he was a history teacher, a religion teacher. The other one was just like a guy who sat in the library all day and he was the rowing coach. So you can kind of imagine what type of dude this is. And I remember they were sitting there talking about, the Ferguson situation. And I couldn't tell you exactly what they were saying, but I was like, wow, these people are really like low-key justifying like the murder of an unarmed person. And that happened a lot. Like it happened a lot. When Trayvon Martin got killed, I was in 8th grade. You heard people justifying it. Every single publicized police killing of an unarmed black person, I would hear people justifying it. That, to me, I internalize that as y'all don't care about me. You don't care about this person. I identify with this person more than I identify with you. We might be classmates. We might go to the same school. I might see you for 7 hours a day, but I identify with that person, that random black man in Minnesota, 10 times more than I identify with you, precisely because of the racialized experiences that we have. But I would go to school and I would hear people literally justifying the murder of somebody who I identified with. So what does that tell me about what they think about me? And so again, this was coloring my experience at the beginning of sophomore year. And then to make matters worse, again, this was in the news cycle the whole year. But then the spring of 2015, I believe his name was Freddie Gray in Baltimore. He got killed, and that sparked off a whole nother set of riots. And so my whole sophomore year's book ended by these two major racial incidents that were accompanied by protests and riots. And again, you're hearing all these different opinions. Oh, well, why are they acting like that? They need to protest peacefully. This is not what MLK would want. This is the conversation that I'm hearing from my peers, from some of the adults in the building, right? So as somebody who there were 300 kids in our class. I think maybe 20 of us were black. So you already feel outnumbered. You already feel small. You already feel like you stick out. And then you're hearing all these conversations. You start to feel unwelcomed. And the thing about my school was that it was a commuter school. Like I was taking the train from 7th grade to through 10th grade, and then I started driving. But like most people were taking the train to school. Like most people, the school was in Dorchester, but most people weren't from Dorchester. I was living in Stoughton. There were a lot of kids from the South Shore. So yeah, your Braintrees, your Cohasset, Scituate, Hanover, right? Again, these towns, the Duxbury, these towns that are 9% white. These kids are coming. Their parents are, finance people, right? They got money. Not saying that I'm not financially privileged too, but like again, this is their perspective on the world, and this is what I have to hear. And so, like I said, that was my sophomore year experience. And I think my mom could tell that, especially when the Baltimore stuff was happening. I think she could tell like it was affecting me. Because again, I'm 16. Like I think Freddie Gray must have been like, he was young, right? I don't think he was a grown man. So I'm looking at this man like that could have been me. Right, when the Trayvon Martin stuff happened, I was like, that could have been me. All of these incidences, I'm looking at like that could have been me, and you're hearing people like justify it. It's like, dang, so if this happened to me, you would be justifying my death, huh? And I think my mom realized it was affecting me, and so what she decided to do was give me the New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And I know her heart was in the right place, but reading that book made me so upset. I remember I started reading it during finals, so I like finished my finals early because I'm like that. And then I would open this book, and I was locked in. I don't like to read. I think I've said that many times on this podcast. I hate reading. I have never liked it. I have a bunch of books behind me that I've started and never finished and never planned on. Like I'm not a reader, but this book, I was like, this is information that I need, because when I have these conversations with different kids and I'm trying to explain to them my perspective and why we feel a certain type of way when you guys say stuff like, oh, well, he should have just complied. Oh, why are they writing? Oh, why are they responding like this? Oh, it's not a big deal, right? I'm trying to explain these different things. Oh, well, racism doesn't exist anymore. We got a black president. I'm trying to explain all of these things. And so I needed facts. I need statistics. I needed figures. And what the new Jim Crow, it has facts, figures, and statistics on the war on drugs. But it was a lot. And I mean, it was a lot. It's a dense read. Again, it's a lot of numbers. It's kind of guided by some narratives, but there's a lot of numbers. And I just remember when I finished it, I think it took me like maybe a month to read. When I finished it, I was beyond angry. I think that was my radicalization point, where I was just like, excuse my language, but fuck all this shit. Like, I didn't care anymore. That's when I got into like all white people are racist, which is not something I believe now. But like that's how I felt. I was like, yo, all white people are racist. Like the system's fucked up. Like all of this stuff, because I'm looking at the actual facts behind something that we kind of already knew. As a black person, by the time you hit 16, you're very aware of how the world works, and you know it's working against you. But to see the policies that, okay, if someone were indicted on a charge for powder cocaine, it would be X amount of years. If someone was indicted on a charge for crack cocaine, it was 10 times the amount. How does that make sense? There's no justification. There's no reason other than that black people were using crack and we want to lock those black people up. Like, you look at the numbers, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 black men are going to get locked up in their lives, right? Like, you look at these numbers as a 16-year-old, when you're being told that the world is your oyster, you can go out and do whatever you want, and that's the message that I'm getting. And then I'm looking at, it's like this kind of duality where there are people who are trying to preach hope and you can do this and you can do that, and then I'm looking at the reality that it doesn't seem as though the world is interested in seeing me be my best self. It seems as though the society I live in is hell bent on making my life as terrible as possible, if not taking it away. That's how I felt. And so I think that put that really put a real damper on the way I looked at the world. I think that summer I remember I spent a lot of time in the summers. That summer, I was trying to make the basketball team. I talked about this in my episode with Carl. But I was trying to make the basketball team, so I was hooping all the time. But I was spending a lot of time just playing basketball with myself and my thoughts, listening to music. And I was really kind of just philosophizing to like on a kind of informal scale. But I was thinking about it a lot. I would spend an hour every day taking the train to school so I could go work out and taking an hour on the way back taking the train, right? So I had a lot of time with myself. I'm listening to music. The music I was listening to, To Pimp a Butterfly, dropped in 2015. I was listening to that album. I was listening to a lot of like conscious hip hop, because that's just how I felt. Like I was angry. I was an angry kid. I'm already a teenager, right? So you already got the angsty teen stuff. You add the racial dynamics. I was angry. Like I was really angry. I was the rebel without the cause. Like that was who I was. And then my junior year is when I snapped, for lack of a better term. We in our school, my friends and I, like my black friends, we were always trying to advocate for ourselves and have our experience heard, because again, like what I just enumerated, like the experience we had in school was not the same as our white peers. It was very much worse. Socially, like you couldn't just be a student. And we always try to explain that, especially to the adults in the building, because like we felt like we were at a disadvantage. You guys are having us do this and do this and do this and do this, and every day I got to answer to, hey, why can't I say that word but you can't? You know what I'm saying? Like it's a lot. And so we spent a lot of time from my freshman to sophomore year trying to get these people to hear us. Why is it that every book we read was written by a white guy? Right? Like why? Asking all these different questions and never feeling like we were heard. And then having spent so much time doing this, but being in a building where they're telling us, oh, we care about equality, oh, we care about, helping the community and things like that, and feeling like, yo, no, you don't, because we're a part of this community and we don't feel welcome. All of that boiled over and came to a head in January of my junior year. Every single year, like I said, I went to a Catholic school, so we had mass basically once a month, like an all-school mass in the gym. But in January, right around MLK Day, they would have the MLK prayer service. It wasn't a Catholic mass; it was a prayer service where basically they would invite like a black pastor and a choir, and we would have black church for a day, and we would just spend the whole day talking about black shit. And it was the one day we had where it was about some black shit. In the 160 days, the other 159 days or whatever that we were in school, like it was like, yo, you're black, like you felt that your blackness was a burden to your experience. But that one day, like we was gonna talk about what we wanted to talk about, the things that matter to us, our perspective. My junior year, these people decided that during the mass, they were going to put on a play about the Northern Irish and their struggle for liberation. Now, that's not to say, they're not parallels and their story doesn't matter, but you're pandering to a student population that is mostly Irish. That's why you did that. That's why you did that. So you decided that instead of talking about things that happen in this country, that the ramifications still affect students that exist in your student body, you're going to pander to the majority and talk about something that they feel like they can relate to a little bit more. We found out about this like maybe a week before the prayer service was supposed to happen. We were all so upset. We were like, we're going to walk out. We didn't end up walking out, but we made a big fuss about it. We ended up talking to the administrators about it. But, when that happened, that felt like the biggest slap in the face. And I want to do an episode with some of my brothers from high school, because I know how I felt. And I would like to talk to them about how they felt and how they processed this, because, even what is it, 8 years later, this still that still kind of brings up a feeling of disgust for me and a feeling of betrayal. Like you really just don't care. You don't get it. You don't care. It's not, it doesn't matter. And for us, or at least for me, one of the things was when we were telling them about that leading up. So like I said, we found out like maybe a week or two before the prayer service was actually about to happen. We were talking to administrators about it, and they're like, their biggest thing was just don't walk. They were trying to get us to not be angry. They didn't care why we were angry or rectify the situation. They just didn't want it to look bad on their end, because like a bunch of kids walk out in the middle of a prayer service, like, that looks bad for us, right? So that was one of those things where at that point I was like, and again, excuse my language, but these people don't give a fuck about me. Not only like this, not just the small community that I'm in, right? Because that hurt. like this school, you hear all, we're a family, we're building you to be great young men, this, that. You're hearing about Jesus and this and this and this and this. But it's like, y'all don't care. You do not care about me. And it's been proven. I don't care what you tell me. Your actions have proven to me that you do not care about me. And that hurt a lot because the world was saying the same thing to me. That's what I felt, right? Again, you're seeing somebody you identify, somebody that looks like you getting killed, and you see pundits justifying it. You see the killer walk free. Like, this is what I was seeing. And so just to have that in this community that claims to care about me, that claims to be carrying Jesus' mission, like, that was it. That was the final straw for me. I mean, I literally, from that point in time on, like January of 2016, I stopped talking. Like, I'm so talkative. You guys know that. I would walk through the hallways with my head down, and I would say 5 words a day. Like, it was so obvious that I was not okay. And I would eat lunch by myself. I was the type of person at lunchtime, like, I was bouncing around tables. I was talking to everybody. I started eating lunch by myself in the guidance counselor's office. I just didn't want to talk to anybody. Like, it really, really had a serious negative effect on me. And again, it was junior year too, so like academically, that's a big year. And my grades took a little bit of a hit. Not too much of it, because I still finished with a 4.3 GPA. Talk to me nice. But it took a hit. Speaking of GPA, one of the other things that I wanted to speak on in terms of like my school experience, man, from the time I was in 5th grade, I literally wrote in my 5th grade yearbook that I wanted to go to Harvard. My dad went there. I felt like if my dad could do it, I could do it, right? It was the epitome of excellence. So that's what I wanted to do, and I would tell people that all the time. And when I got to BC High, I told people that, especially like freshman year, because I remember freshman year when our GPAs came out for the first quarter, everybody was like, "Oh, what's your GPA?" It's super competitive environment. What's your GPA? What's your GPA? I told people I had a 3.9 GPA. I'd be like, "Yeah, I got a 3.9." No, you didn't. What you mean? No, I didn't. You just asked. I told you. No, you didn't. Let me see. All right, you got to bet me $5 I can get a 3.9. No, bet. Pull up my report card, 3.9. I can't believe that. Like, this is. Nobody believed I was as smart as I was. The amount of times people would tell me, "Oh, yeah, when I first met you, I thought you were stupid." Why? Well, I don't know. You're just kind of loud. What does that have to do with anything? Right? I remember sitting in chemistry class my sophomore year talking to this one kid. He said, he was like, "Oh, have you started thinking?" Because he was a junior. He was like, "Have you started thinking about college?" We're in honors chemistry. He's a junior. I'm a sophomore. All right. He's like, "Oh, have you started thinking about colleges?" Yeah. I was like, "Yeah, I want to go to Harvard." He's like, "Oh, you're only going to get in because of affirmative action." It's like, bro, we're in the same class. I'm a year behind you. Like, look at my grades. I'm outperforming you. We're not even the same conversation. I think when I graduated, there might have been like, I probably was in the top 20. I don't really remember, but like, these were the conversations. People would tell me all the time, "You're not gonna, if you get into a good school, it's not because you worked hard. It's not because you're performing well academically. It's not because you're involved in the community. It's because of affirmative action." So that's why this kind of case sparked this kind of, I don't know, fire, because I used to hear that all the time. And it's, for me, I think there was a benefit for schools to be like, "Yeah, we actively want to have more diverse faces, and so we're going to put extra consideration on this person." But at the end of the day, you do a blind look at my application, like I was him. Like I said, I graduated with 4.1 cumulative GPA. I got a 32 on my ACT. I didn't study nothing. I didn't even know what I was doing. Right? Like, I was like, academically, I was like that. But I was hearing people who were significantly worse than me academically telling me that my spot, I didn't earn it. When I got into Harvard, that was a whole big deal. There were only 3 of us that got in. It was this white kid, Ian McGregor, and then 2 black kids, me and Delano Franklin. And people were telling me, I mean, there were kids who were mad. They were upset. "Oh, he only got in because he's black." No, I got into school because I do well academically, but I do more than sit in the library all day studying. I mean, like, these are the kids who were mad. Like, they were the type of kids that literally just sat in the library all day. They didn't do nothing but, like, do school. And it's like, okay, you got good grades, but everybody going to elite institutions has good grades. What's going to separate you? So this conversation around affirmative action is one that's very, like, it touches me on a personal level, because I have a huge chip on my shoulder when I walk around. Not so much now, but I still do, because all I ever heard was people telling me that whatever spot, whatever I did, I didn't earn it because of affirmative action. When the reality is that, as a black person, as a person of, I don't believe in person of color. I'm gonna speak for myself as a black man. Like, you have to do so much more to be looked at as semi equally, right? They're never looking at me as an equal. Even today, when I walk in places, it's the difference between when they see me and then after they ask me where I went to school. I can see the difference. I see the difference. But I didn't get into that school because I'm black. I got in that school because I'm brilliant. And I just so happen to be black. Because there were plenty of people that I met at that institution who I was like, you're not particularly intelligent. I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I don't care to have the numbers in front of me. But the fact of the matter is, the legacy admissions far outweigh black admissions, right? Like, oh, kids with potential donors far outweighs like these affirmative action admits. So the numbers, the facts don't even support these sentiments. And then to have it go up to the highest court of the land and they say, yeah, nah, the people who was wrong, we're siding with them. Like there's a certain level of just disgust that creates for me. And a kind of hopelessness. Like I said, in my last episode, the point was to like talk about how do you maintain hope in a world that seems like it's cold. And this ruling is a reminder of that. Like, how am I supposed to feel like, man, things are gonna go good for me, right? Like things are looking up when this is the world I exist in. These are the things that are happening that I'm looking at every single day and saying, I got to figure out how to operate in this world. And again, like I said, for me, this has had a very like real impact on my mental health. Like I said, I got a full diagnosis for depression and anxiety, right? Like I take antidepressants, like I'm dealing with that. You know what I'm saying? And it's something that I've learned to cope with, but I haven't gotten rid of it. I've been going to therapy for 7+ years. I still am dealing with these problems, right? And again, some of it is, hereditary, but a lot of it is because of the world I live in. And the world I live in says you don't fucking matter. Unless you produce something that's going to benefit somebody more important than you, you just don't matter. And I find it very difficult to wake up every day and be like, yeah, like things are looking up. I'm not an optimist. I probably land more on the pessimistic side. I try to just, be a little bit objective in the way I kind of look at the world. But the fact of the matter is the world was shitty. People in charge don't care. Power is corrupting, or corrupt people get power. Either way, like this shit ain't sweet. And I haven't figured out all the way how to navigate a world where shit ain't sweet. I'm working on it. I really am. Like I said, I spend so much time thinking about these things. I literally have a note that spans back to 2016 because I've been trying to figure out how to navigate this world for that long. And this podcast is part of it. Like, you just literally watching me try to figure out how to navigate this world through these, through the conversations, through the solo episodes, through the interviews. It's me trying to figure out how to navigate the world. And I haven't figured it out yet. And like, especially with the mental health stuff, like, it's for me when I sit here, because I don't want nobody to feel bad for me. I hate sympathy. Like, I hate it. So I tend not to talk about, like, sometimes I really don't feel like doing anything at all. Like, nothing. Like, I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to talk to nobody. I don't want to do nothing. Sometimes I don't feel particularly ambitious. Sometimes I feel like giving up. All of these things happen on a rather regular basis, but I don't like to talk about it because I don't want nobody to feel bad for me. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of people dealing with that, and I think it's important that those of us who do care, because I think most people care to a certain degree about the well-being of others. I think it's important that those of us do care, do our best to help each other navigate this world, because I can't do it by myself, and I'm pretty sure none of us can. And so, like I said, I don't have a solution. This episode, this conversation that we're having was not coming from any place of authority. I don't know nothing. What I do know is how I experience the world, and I would like my experience of the world to be different. I would like it to be better. And I think in order to do that, there are things I need to change in my life right now. I'm always trying to figure those things out. But, all the time, people ask, yeah, why are you depressed? I've had that, and it's not all the time. People don't ask me that because I don't talk about it a lot. But, I've had conversations with people like, why are you depressed? And it's like, when I was younger, especially like my freshman year of college, people asked me, like, a girl I was seeing, she asked me, I was like, yo, I honestly don't know. I do know because the world doesn't give a fuck about me. That's why. And so you wake up, it's like, what is the point? Fortunately, you get to kind of decide what the point is for you as an individual. But a lot of times I really sit there and think in the back of my head, what is the point of all this? But I keep fighting. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, is no matter how kind of down on the world I get, I'm too stubborn to give up. And so I continue to try to figure out how I can live the best way possible, how I can be the best version of myself, take the things I've been given, because I've been given a lot. I don't want this to come off as like, oh my God, feel bad for me. Again, I don't like sympathy. I don't want nobody to feel bad for me. You don't need to feel bad for me. I'm good. I'm blessed, right? I'm very privileged, like all of those things. And I'm grateful for all those things, but that doesn't change the fact that I experience the world in a certain way. But one of the things that's important for me is to not only figure out how to best live my life so that I'm satisfied, but if I can figure it out, give as many people as possible some blueprint or some idea of what they could do to help themselves out, because a lot of people are struggling. We don't talk about mental health as much as people say we do, right? Like, it's the conversation is more prevalent than it has been probably ever, but it's still not as prevalent as it should be, because there are so many people who are walking around holding things in because they don't feel like it's appropriate to say them. They don't feel like the response is going to be adequate. They don't feel like they have the resources necessary to combat it, so they'd rather just not focus on it at all. And that to me is a travesty. That's a shame. So if nobody else is going to have the conversation, I'm going to have the conversation. But I invite anybody to engage in this conversation with me. I hate that we're gonna start a dialogue. I think talking only does so much, but to a certain degree, sometimes talking is all you have. Sometimes these forms of internal communication are our only forms of resistance, and so not to be Mr. Burn It All Down, but that's kind of how I'm feeling. But regardless of all that, I still strive to to live a meaningful life and a fulfilling life, and one that is filled with peace, love, joy, and positivity as much as possible. And I'm working on it. I hope you are all working on that. If you're in a great spot, I'm super happy for you. If you're not in a great spot, I hope that improves for you. And if I can do anything to help, whether it be something that I say in this podcast, whether it be a conversation, that's really what I'm about. More than anything else in this world, I just want to help people, right, in whatever ways that I can. Again, I think my talent is in communication. I think I'm a pretty good listener. I think I give good advice, right? So I do what I can, and I hope everybody else is doing what they can for themselves as well as their people. And with that being said, this has been another episode of the Global Renaissance Podcast. I appreciate you all for tuning in. As always, if you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Music, or any other audio platform, please leave a rating and a review, hopefully 5 stars. But give me some feedback. I really appreciate it. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead, like, comment, subscribe, all of that. Please share this if you like the episode. Again, if you have any feedback for me, let me know in the comments and the reviews, or you can let me know on social media, where you can follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at _Trev Woods. You can follow the podcast on those 3 platforms at the Global Renaissance Pod. Once again, I'm your host, Trev Woods. I think I'm going to start calling myself that, like, for good. We'll figure that out. We'll talk about that later. But once again, I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and I'll catch y'all on the next episode.